We're going to have people coming in. They have a lot to pack into, and I know that we will be done, or they will be done right around the 3:45 mark. Also, know that we had time for questions. What we'll probably ask you to do at 3:45, we're going to go ahead and we will let you go. Those that want to go, those that want to stay and ask questions, we'll take those people down here. We are videotaping this. It got real quiet all of a sudden. Audio and video, because I know there are people that will want to see this, and we just need to have that. So that will be also part of this. You received the bio sketches today from Mr. Taylor and Ms. Lofaso, a professor of West Virginia College Law, and Mr. Taylor is Associate Dean, West Virginia University College of Law. So let's give them a welcome, please.
Thank you very much, Steve. I just want to start with a disclaimer that we're not here to give legal advice. We're here to, I know, it's very funny, because we're law professors. That doesn't mean we're lawyers licensed in the state of Ohio. In fact, neither one of us is licensed in the state of Ohio. Fortunately, this is all federal law, not state law, or most of it is. Anyway, I started this way in the last meeting too. I'm with the elementary school teachers, right? Oh, well, I have a little 7-year-old, and John, you have a 9-year-old, right? 9-year-old. 9-year-old, yeah. So I'll be imagining my little daughter's second grade teacher here. But the way I started last time was that I just wanted everyone to know that we in Morgantown, everyone in Morgantown roots for Ohio State, other than, of course, West Virginia University, but Ohio State especially when it's going against Michigan because of Rich Rodriguez. So we're Ohio State fans just like you guys, or at least some of you, right? Okay. All right, so we're here today to talk about religion in the public schools. These are our topics. As you can see, they're numerous, so we're going to have to go zip through these slides. The issue of the proper role of religion in public schools continues to be one of great controversy. But the subject matter is complex, though it should not be divisive. It is sometimes very difficult to understand, and we're going to try to give you some themes and ideas so you can have a better sense of how the subject matter, what the law is. So we're here to try to explain the law. John and I may disagree or agree with certain things in the law, but those are our personal opinions. We're not giving you our personal opinion today. We're going to try to just describe what the law is. We ask that you hold all questions to the end because we have so many slides. And we are going to start by giving you this big picture of what the religion clauses are. John's going to do that, and then we're going to go through topic by topic as the time is allotted.
Thanks, Ann. Good afternoon. Now, this is interesting because I was told the last group that back home in Morgantown, I sort of make everybody come down to the front, which I'm not going to do. Now, the elementary school teachers are sitting closer to the front, but you're all over here. And I don't really know why that is. I don't know, maybe. It's the door that's open. A simple ask and you shall receive a simple explanation. Okay. What I'm going to do is begin by trying to talk very quickly about big picture ideas. Okay, a couple of facts. By general acclamation, American society and the American people are among the most religious, indeed probably the most religious in the world. At the same time, compared to a lot of other places in the world, the government here does very little, really, to promote, support, financially or otherwise, religion. And the basic premise of the American constitutional experiment is the idea that this is not an accident, that in fact the founders believed, and the people in the Supreme Court have continued to believe, that really government is better off, religion is better off, and people have more religious liberty if state and church are kept relatively separate, okay? And you see some quotes here from very different eras all sounding this theme that religion and government are better off if they're kept separate. Some of the big picture constitutional values sort of at stake behind this idea that separation is good for the state and it's good for the church. First of all, the idea of religious liberty, right? In America, our tradition says we believe that religious choices should be made freely and privately by individuals. The state has a lot of coercive power, which it could use to try to force people into one kind of religious practice rather than another. We don't want that to happen. We want choice to be free. Furthermore, the state has enormous communicative resources. The state has a huge bully pulpit, if you will. You know, there could be religious messages on every stop sign if the state wanted to do that. But no, the idea is the state shouldn't use its communication power in that way. Again, we should allow individuals and private groups to make up their minds about what to do and what to believe religiously. Second big theme, avoiding religious conflict. The framers had witnessed a long history of religious war in Europe. They basically thought the lesson of history was that if you allow government to have the power to try to sort of force people or even heavily persuade people to take one religious view rather than another, religious groups will kill each other over who's going to get to control the government and exercise that power. It didn't work out very well in Europe. Why do that here? Third theme, government lacks the competence to declare religious truth. Right? Happens everywhere. Okay. Government lacks the competence to declare religious truth. Government's jurisdiction is over temporal matters, not over religious matters, and government simply shouldn't be in the business of doing things like deciding what religious beliefs are true, and it shouldn't be in the business of doing things like composing prayers. Fourth theme, government involvement tends to corrupt religion. This came out very strongly in discussions about funding of religion in the framers' time. Madison and Jefferson basically thought that religious dependence on the state for funding made religion fat and lazy, and that ultimately it was bad for the church. And they would say, look at Europe, where the church is state-supported and isn't nearly as vibrant as it is in the U.S. Also, the idea that if government gets involved in religious speech, what you have is politicians trying to score political points by manipulating people's religious beliefs and appropriating them to their own ends. Is that really a good thing for the purity of religion? Final theme, religious equality. In America, the idea is we all are Americans, we all are members of the same community, we all respect each other, we have different religious beliefs, and that's okay. We're not a country of religious insiders and outsiders. What you believe religiously should not affect whether you are a real American or not. So these are sort of some of the big picture themes. You see these themes rooted in the Constitution in the part of the First Amendment known as the religion clauses. It's really two clauses. There's the text, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Sometimes there's tension between the two clauses, but the basic idea is this. The Establishment Clause applies to government action. The government should not be in the business of promoting religion, advancing religion, nor should it be in the business of disparaging or hindering religion. At the same time, private individuals have protected rights of religious speech and protected conduct. Now, the kicker in the public schools is that you folks, when you're away from your jobs, obviously you have the same rights of speech and religious conduct as everybody else. When you were in the workplace, when you were acting as teacher or principal or whatever it is, or guidance counselor or whatever it is that you were an agent of the state, and what you do is attributable to the state, and therefore the Establishment Clause applies to you. The Supreme Court has been particularly vigilant about enforcing the Establishment Clause in the public schools. And the reason why is well captured in this long quote from a 1987 case called Edwards versus Aguillard. I call this sort of the social contract theory of the public schools. Parents send their kids into the public schools expecting them to be taught shared community values and to be prepared for life as citizens and as workers and to be educated people. They don't send them into public schools to be a captive audience for the proselytization of religious views with which they might or might not agree, right? And the way we sort of keep the peace and give everybody a stake in the public schools is to make them religiously neutral. The courts take the view that teachers have a great deal of authority, kids are very impressionable, and so it is extremely important that kids be able to go to public school without feeling like they're being pressured or induced toward particular religious views. The court has given form to the Establishment Clause in the legal doctrine through three tests, the so-called Lemon test, which is up here in yellow, the endorsement test, and the coercion test. The oldest test is the so-called Lemon test. The idea is government action should always have a secular purpose. If a government action is meant simply to promote a religious view, it is automatically invalid. Government action's primary effects should neither advance nor inhibit religion. Indeed, this idea of neutrality. And religion and government should not be closely entangled. It would take a long time to explain what that means, but in questions, if you're curious, I can talk about that more. There's also this idea of endorsement. The government should not be in the business of endorsing religion. A reasonable observer should not look at government action and say, oh, that seems to me to be putting the government's weight behind a particular religious view. And again, this is associated with Justice O'Connor. The idea is that government action endorsing religion tends to divide us into religious insiders and outsiders, and that's not good. The final idea is the so-called coercion test. The Establishment Clause means at least that the government should not be coercing people into participation in religious activity. And in the public school context, the court has been very sensitive to the idea that, look, kids are extremely vulnerable to peer pressure. And as teachers, you all know this, right? I mean, kids don't want to stand out. They don't want to be different from everybody else. And so if you create context in the public school where a lot of kids are engaging in some kind of religious activity like saying a prayer, the kid who doesn't want to do that is going to feel a great deal of pressure to conform and fit in, and the court has said that can count as impermissible coercion in the public school context. So there's a whirlwind tour, sort of big picture, and then Ann is going to talk to us about the topic of prayer in schools applying some of these ideas.
Thank you, John. Now, as John was talking about, I think it's even more important to remember in this area, because you are elementary school teachers, that students are particularly impressionable at a young age. So in some ways, some of these slides are even more important for you, and there's other slides when we talk about evolution that's probably not as important, because you're probably not teaching that level of biology in the science classes in elementary school. So, but one thing I do want to emphasize, and John will emphasize, is this idea that your children are very impressionable. So in some of these, in school prayer, for example, it's even more important that there be this separation between the school and religion. Here are the general rule. Wait, I think I'm one ahead. Okay, so here's the big picture. School-sponsored prayer in the public schools is always unconstitutional. Okay, what is school-sponsored? But we'll talk about that. Private, holy, student-initiated prayer is constitutionally protected, so long as it does not disrupt school activities or interferes with other students. So we have this public-private divide where students can quietly pray as long as they're not disrupting the curriculum or the school activities, but the school cannot sponsor prayer. So student-initiated prayer is perfectly fine. Courts will rarely find public prayer in school settings to be wholly devoid of school sponsorship, and that probably makes sense. If there's going to be some sort of public prayer in school, you would imagine that there would be some sort of school sponsorship. At the very least, it would look like endorsement. Remember the endorsement test that John was talking about? And if you have endorsement, or if you meet the Lemon test, or if you meet the coercive test, then you're probably going to have an Establishment Clause problem. The constitutionality of school prayer first came up in a case that actually arose out of New York called Engel. And in that case, the court held unconstitutional the daily use of a 22-word prayer. It seems pretty innocuous, but it was, Almighty God, we acknowledge our dependence upon Thee, and we beg Thy blessing upon us, our parents, our teachers, and our country. And the point here is that even if the prayer is non-denominational, you would still have an Establishment Clause problem. So whether it's very clear, Jesus Christ, Allah, whoever, or non-denominational as this one was, you still have the same problems. Okay, here's some more rules. So we talked about institutionalized or organized public school prayer is unconstitutional. Organized prayer in the public school setting, whether it's in the classroom or a school-presented event, is going to be unconstitutional. Teachers may not ask students to recite a prayer. That's what happened with that 22-word prayer. Teachers may not set aside moments of silence for the purpose of prayer, although, of course, moments of silence, which are very common and very common in schools, they are constitutional so long as they're not for the purpose of prayer, okay? Teachers may not sponsor prayer. We just talked about that. And the only type of prayer that is constitutionally permissible is, as we said, the private student-initiated prayer. Again, the public sponsorship, the school, the state, you guys are state agents because you're state employees. That's one thing versus the private, the student initiated. So this is a good quote. The Establishment Clause forbids state-sponsored prayer in public schools settings no matter how that goes with the other one, non-denominational the prayer is. That was from the other one. Sorry about that. I should have put that with the other slide. Okay. So let's go now to the private side for a second. May students pray? Okay. May students pray. Voluntary individual prayer that is not coercive and does not substantially disrupt the school's educational mission and activities is constitutional. So John and I in the ride over were talking about this. So let's say you have a student in class and you ask him, what is 3 times 7? And instead of saying 21, he says, just a minute, I'm praying, right? No, you're supposed to, obviously the students are supposed to be paying attention. Obviously, students, you have some control over your classroom, but students at lunchtime, they can pray, and we're not supposed to, as teachers, stop them. If they want to do that, it's non-disruptive, that's fine. And that, I hope that's pretty obvious, that we can do that. Students may engage with other students in religious activities during non-curricular periods. We just talked about that. Student-led, student-initiated prayer may be constitutionally permissible so long as it is not done over the school's public address system and does not involve faculty, coach, or staff participation. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a second, and you'll see how that arises often. Let's see. So another thing, just to enforce this, is that any school endorsement of prayer, though, is going to be violating the Establishment Clause. So you have to be very careful about those types of things, okay? Critical to ensure that it is actually student-initiated. So those are the two things just to think of as an easy guide to understanding the Constitution in this area. Okay. We talked about moments of silence, so let's go on to the next one. Can there be prayer before or after athletic events or activities? Okay, this comes up a lot. There's some case law on this. Student-led, student-initiated prayer at an athletic event with no involvement by teachers or school officials or the coach is constitutional. So again, if the students just want to, that's their free speech right. They're allowed to do that, and you as teachers, as state agents, are not supposed to be stopping that or inhibiting it or anything like that. But a school policy permitting students to vote on whether to have student-led prayer over the public address systems at football games is unconstitutional. A coach may not initiate prayer or lead a team in prayer. A coach may not ask a team member to initiate a prayer before, during, or after a game. And a coach may not participate in the prayer with the students. Okay? So, again, I hope you're starting to see the pattern here between the public and the private divide. Can there be prayer at graduation ceremonies? Prayers delivered by clergy at official public school graduation ceremonies are unconstitutional. So even if you have the rabbi one year, the Muslim clergy another year, the Roman Catholic priest another year, the Baptist minister another year, another Protestant minister another year, that's still unconstitutional. Remember, it's not about it being denominational or not, or non-denominational, or equal access to each religion. You cannot have public prayer at graduation ceremonies. You can, however, have a baccalaureate service, which are distinct and separate from the official graduation ceremony. They would be constitutional. They can include prayers, but they have to be student-initiated. They can't be the teacher's idea, the school's idea, the teacher's organizing it. So, for example, if a group of Jewish students want to have a temple service before graduation, that's fine. If a bunch of Christian students want to do their service, that's fine. Or a mass for Christian Catholics, or some sort of Muslim ceremony. Those baccalaureate exercises are fine, and one can imagine why that would be. Of course, people in their private life are allowed to do what they want. Again, the school cannot sponsor that. May teachers pray in school? Okay. Let's do what you can't do first. It is unconstitutional for teachers to pray with or in the presence of students in school or in their capacities as teachers or representatives of the school. Okay? Now, if you're in the faculty lounge and you want to pray, that's fine. If you can go to church on Sunday or whatever your Sabbath is, you can practice your religion. What you can't do is what is up here on the screen. You cannot pray with or in the presence of students in school or in your capacity as teachers or representatives of the school. So that's what you have to remember. Okay, and I just went over your free speech rights, and that you are still citizens of the United States. You still have constitutional rights. Okay, I'm going to turn this over to John. I should say, because is that not only are you citizens, but I was telling the other teachers this afterward, I personally believe, and I'm sure John does too, I mean, you are among the most important people of the citizens of this country, and what you're doing is very important, and I know we both appreciate teachers.
Indeed. Okay, thank you, Anne. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about religion within the school curriculum. And the first important point here is that the long and short of this is that it is perfectly okay to teach about religion, but it is not okay to teach religion in the sense of teaching it as true or authoritative. So the Supreme Court has always said from the very beginning in the first school prayer decision, look, the state should not be in the business of promoting religion or endorsing it or declaring it as being true. On the other hand, religion is a big part of human life, always has been. It's a big part of understanding history, a big part of understanding literature, a big part of understanding other cultures, and obviously educated people are going to need to know about that. Probably educating about other people's religious traditions and so forth is maybe not as big a thing at the elementary school level as it would be later, but there's going to be some of that even there. So you can teach about religion. You don't have to pretend that religion doesn't exist, but you should not be teaching it as true. And in particular, this often comes up with questions about the Bible. To say the least, the Bible is sort of a foundational document for Western culture, even for folks who don't have any religious convictions themselves. You're going to have a very hard time understanding a lot of history, understanding a lot of Western literature if you don't know anything about the Bible. So you need to know something about that. So the question has arisen, could we have courses on the Bible as literature? Courts in theory have said yes. On the other hand, in practice, many school systems that have done this, it's turned out that what they were doing was basically sort of a fig leaf, if you will, for teaching the Bible in a devotional manner, which you can't do. As you might expect, the idea that you could have a course on the Bible as literature or the Bible as history, and this could be done in a constitutional manner, it's much more easy to imagine that being implemented successfully with older kids. If you're talking about kids who are, 8, 9, 10 years old, probably not all that likely that many schools are going to be able to implement a course on the Bible in a constitutional manner, and I would not really, were I your lawyer, which I'm not, I wouldn't really recommend trying to do that. I would leave that for kids to be older. It also follows from this that, again, the Bible is not per se, I'm sorry, well, let's start there. The Bible's not per se banished from schools, but teachers should not be referring to the Bible as an authoritative source of truth and saying, look in here are the answers, right? The Bible should be treated as an important document, but not as a document that's religiously authoritative when the teacher is teaching in the classroom. Okay, the next slide sort of makes the intuitive point, can schools teach secular values that coincide with religious values? And the answer is, of course, as long as it's done in the right way. It would be crazy to think that you couldn't teach kids to be kind to other people and not to hurt and to try to talk before resorting to violence and things like that, because religions teach these things too. In teaching these values, you should refrain from saying, well, you should think about how that person feels and identify with that person and try to help them because that person, like you, is a child of God. that would be basically, sort of justifying the ideal from an explicitly religious standpoint, and whatever you may believe personally, you shouldn't be bringing that part of it into the classroom, but obviously you can teach sort of shared community values. Okay, the last thing I'm going to talk about under this heading is a bit more complicated. The question is, what happens with religious assignments, right? And first important thing to understand here is when we're talking about student speech that is part of the curriculum, student papers or their work on tests or presentations they give in class or whatever it is, teachers have very wide authority over this. Courts recognize that teachers need to be able to make educational judgments, and anything you do in that regard is going to be upheld by courts as long as it is, quote, reasonably related to a legitimate pedagogical objective, and without going to law school, you can probably gather that that's meant to be a fairly deferential standard. It's meant to say, we want to sort of respect teachers' judgments in this area. What sometimes happens, and there are actually a ton of cases about this at the elementary school level, is you can have situations where kids, or in some case the parents, really want to sort of use school assignments as an opportunity to express their religious views. What should you do in that situation? The first point, and maybe an intuitively obvious one, is that if the child's sort of effort to sort of give a religious response to an assignment isn't responsive to the assignment that you gave, you obviously don't have to take it, right? So this is maybe not an elementary school type example, but famous professor uses the example of if you give an essay about military strategy in World War II, a student who comes back and says, well, I don't want to talk about military strategy because true Christians are pacifists and we wouldn't have been in World War II. You don't have to take that, right? The student has no free speech right to sort of refuse to do the assignment on religious grounds. What typically comes up in the case law in a situation of the sort you might be dealing with is this. Actually, I'm sorry, skipping one thing. So next point is, if you give an assignment that's open-ended, write a report on your favorite book, and somebody whose favorite book is The Imitation of Christ, and they write about that, other things being equal, that's okay. You've given them an assignment, it's within the terms of the assignment, they're directing it at you, that's fine, right? Probably problematic for you to say, no, I won't take that because it's religious. Religious points of view should have equal authority to other points of view coming from students. What becomes a little bit complicated is what if there's a presentation to the class or artwork that's going to be hung in the class, and you're talking about young children. And let's say a young child, at show and tell, say, or in doing a book report, wants to get up and talk about their relationship with Jesus, or if they belong to some other tradition, wants to talk about that tradition in a very overt way. Teachers are often worried, well, will young kids, such as the ones I teach, understand what is the student's point of view and what is my point of view, or will they think everything that I allow to happen in the classroom will be attributed to me? Will I get in trouble for allowing this to happen? In those kinds of scenarios, and there's a lot of case law on this, generally what the courts say is, look, if you as a teacher or you as the school district are worried that allowing a kid to go forth and put the kid in a position where the kid may sort of use the classroom to proselytize to a captive audience, if you want to prevent that, generally speaking, courts will uphold your authority to do that. They will say your actions are reasonably related to the legitimate pedagogical objective of respecting Establishment Clause values. And again, there are a lot of cases with young kids, and by and large, the courts have recognized the authority of teachers to sort of respond to Establishment Clause concerns. Our next topic, evolution and creation, which maybe doesn't have enormous applicability to you, but real quick.
Yes, we will do this quickly because probably you're not teaching evolution, but I'll give you the bare outline, and if you have questions afterward, we can, if you're out of intellectual curiosity, I'm happy to answer questions on this. Evolution must be taught as the dominant paradigm for research in the biological sciences. Creationism may not be taught as science in public school. I mean, that's the basic idea. Intelligent design is also considered part of creationism. It is not considered science, and therefore it may not be taught in a science classroom. Where can it be taught? You may teach, so science teachers may not teach creationism at all, may not even teach it as an alternative to evolution. Okay? So the idea is evolution is taught, not creationism, not intelligent design, nor may creationism or intelligent design be taught as an alternative or a critique to evolution. Any critiques of evolution have to be scientific critiques. You may not put a disclaimer in biological textbooks saying that evolution is merely a theory or anything like that. You're not allowed to undercut the authority of the scientific paradigm. However, creationism may be discussed in public schools as part of a comparative religion class, but it can never be taught as scientific fact. Probably with younger children, it's going to be unusual for you to teach either one of these. And so I think this is probably not these slides are probably not too applicable to you, but again, if you have some intellectual curiosity, we can talk about it in the Q&A.
Thank you, Anne. Okay, let's see here. Right. Okay. Our next topic, teaching about religious holidays, and this is something I imagine does come up for some of you. And the basic line here, rather like what I said about the curriculum before, is can you teach about religious holidays? Can you talk about them? Can you acknowledge that they exist? Sure. What you can't do is celebrate them in the sense that sort of, throw your weight behind them. So it's one thing to sort of talk about this is what people do, we're learning about the season and so forth. It's another thing to say this is really important because this marks the birth of the Savior of the world, which we all know. Then if you were putting yourself sort of a bit more behind it, that is more problematic. So what courts have, the Supreme Court has never addressed this, but what the lower courts tend to say is you can teach about a holiday if it's part of a genuinely secular program of education, if it's presented objectively, doesn't have the effect of advancing or inhibiting religion. Practically speaking, what does that really mean? Okay, well, first of all, if you're talking about holidays, it's good if the holidays have both secular and religious aspects, which most of the well-known ones do. And probably you're safer emphasizing, emphasizing both aspects than only emphasizing the religious ones. You are, generally speaking, allowed to use religious symbols as part of your teaching as long as it's part of a program of education, right? And generally speaking, as long as these things are only up temporarily. It's one thing to sort of have a cross and a menorah up and so forth during the month of December before you break for the holidays. It's another thing to have those things up all year. Courts would be much more skeptical of that. The other thing that I think is very important here is that really, if you're going to say, I'm teaching about religious holidays, you should talk about different ones and they should be from different traditions. If all you're doing is talking about Christian holidays, in most places in the U.S., most students are probably reasonably familiar with the Christian holidays and what they're about. Query how much education about their character they really need. If you want to sort of make the case that we're doing this as part of a sort of secular objective of enhancing cultural understanding, there probably ought to be some comparative aspect and you ought to be talking about different traditions. Last thing is, what about religious music? For example, what if you've got, kids performing at a concert as the school choir? Is there an elementary school choir? I think of that as an older kid. There are, okay. So question might be, what are you going to do, what are you going to do for your concert at the end of the fall semester or whatever it is? And the issue here, especially maybe as you get into more advanced ensembles, is that an awful lot of serious choral music is religious music, right? So if you had a rule saying you can't do any of that music, then you've killed the repertoire. And what courts have tended to say is, look, it's just a matter of balance. If you've got a balance of programs such that this seems like a reasonable sort of artistic judgment about what's good music for kids to do and what is appropriate repertory, that's fine. If on the other hand, out of the whole universe of music, all you select is a whole bunch of Christian songs that are very explicit, that may be a little bit problematic, but again, as long as courts think that educators are making reasonable educational judgments here, they tend to leave that alone.
we're going to now talk about religious displays on school property, and some of this might be very applicable to you guys. Displays of religious symbols, texts, or artwork on school property are impermissible unless a display is integrated into an appropriate secular curriculum. Okay, so for example, you might have, this is pretty common, a portrait of Jesus Christ right next to the principal's office. That is going to violate the Establishment Clause. That's actually a fairly common fact pattern around the United States, and when that's brought to court, the school will lose. But one can imagine a comparative art. You're looking at, there's a lot of artwork that's religious, and there's nothing wrong with showing children different, it's sort of like the music example. It's okay to sample different cultures and to look at these things from different points of view as part of sort of a comparative look. But of course, if we're all, Christian, you might have a problem. Okay, so displays are problematic unless they're integrated somehow. The fact that the display is donated by a private group, which is often what happens, is a private group would donate this artwork. And it's beautiful artwork, but again, the school cannot display it because think of it, it's an endorsement issue, right? It looks like the school is endorsing, say, Christianity or Islam or Judaism, okay? So that gets us to say, may a school permanently display the 10 Commandments within classrooms or on school property? No. A temporary display of the 10 Commandments integrated into a secular curriculum, such as a history of comparative religion, of course, may be permissible. So if you had a temporary display of the 10 Commandments, it's part of a secular curriculum. Again, it's temporary, fine. A permanent display is definitely not, and the courts have found that the 10 Commandments are undeniably religious text. Okay, whoops, let me just get my thing out. They're undeniably a religious text, and courts evaluating permanent displays of the 10 Commandments in public schools have found that such displays, excuse me, have a predominantly religious purpose and violate the Establishment Clause. Remember the lemon test? If it has a religious purpose, if it has religious effects or religious entanglement, you're violating the Establishment Clause. So one can imagine the 10 Commandments, you're putting up the 10 Commandments, it has a religious purpose, and that's why it violates the Establishment Clause. And I think, may a school permanently display religious artwork within classroom? No, similar to displays of the 10 Commandments, a temporary display of religious artwork integrated into a secular curriculum may be permissible, and we just talked about that, where you might actually show some artwork as part of as a temporary display, as part of, even a comparative course. But again, if it's a permanent display of religious artwork, you're going to run afoul of the Establishment Clause. And now I will turn it over to John.
Thank you, Anne. We were riding over here today, and then Anne reminded me that we were teaching to two different groups. You're talking to two different groups, the secondary school teachers and the primary school teachers, and we realized that the presentation needed to be tailored. And sitting here, I've just realized that the Equal Access Act really just applies to secondary schools, so I'm going to do this very quickly. Here's the background. There was a time back in the 1970s when the federal courts were somewhat stricter about the Establishment Clause than they are now, and the thought was if you allow student groups to meet on school property and what they're doing is studying the Bible or engaging in various kinds of religious activities, then you were basically promoting religion by giving them that access. During the 1980s, there was a series of cases that changed that, and now what courts tend to say is that if you open up school property and you allow various student groups to use it, and among those groups are student religious groups, that's fine. No Establishment Clause problem. Indeed, barring the students from using school property simply because they want to talk about religion or practice religion would be unconstitutional speech discrimination, right? There's a statute that basically codified that idea for public secondary schools, but you're elementary school teachers, so I won't give you the details of how the statute works. I will tell you that there's some constitutional case law that seems to suggest that the same principles apply to elementary schools, though again, my sense of the matter is that while a sort of student extracurricular groups exist at the elementary school level, that's kind of a bigger issue, I think, probably for secondary school teachers than for elementary school teachers. So bottom line here is student groups meeting on school property in non-curricular time, after school, before school, basically they get the same access rights as everybody else, and allowing them sort of access in equal terms doesn't violate the Establishment Clause.
Great. So that means we get to go ahead several slides to, no, that's okay, I don't mind at all. To teach, wait, did I go too far?
I think you may be pressing the wrong button.
Oh, did I?
It's the left button is for it. Sorry, I'm sorry, man. That's my fault.
All the, no, no, that's my fault. Am I going forward now? Hopefully?
Yes. No, no, no.
Oh my gosh, well, you know, I am a lawyer, obviously not very good at this, okay. All right.
There we go.
Now
Sorry.
we're going, all right, there we go. All right.
Okay, now.
All right, there. So we're going to talk about distribution of religious materials, which I think would have some force in elementary school. I know that my daughter brings home lots of material from the teachers. The Supreme Court has recognized that students' right to free expression in public schools under the Free Speech Clause, that they do have them, okay? So that students have that, let me just see something, right? Too far ahead? Okay. So students have free speech rights. That right, however, is not absolute. So students do not have absolute free speech rights, as you know, right? Because most of the time you are pulling a stick or whatever because they're talking, right? I know that my daughter, do you guys pull sticks? No? I'm really against the whole pulling stick thing, I have to tell you, you know? But anyway. All right, but you're not here for my opinion on that, right? Okay. We can talk about that afterward. Okay. So here are the rules. No distribution of religious materials by teachers other than school or other school officials. So teachers cannot slip into the knapsacks of the children religious materials of their church, right? Okay, you got that, right? All right. No preferential access for outside groups to distribute religious materials. So, for example, you can't have a practice where the Gideons distribute the Bible and no one else has access, right? That makes sense, right? And schools have the discretion to limit distribution of materials produced by third parties, outside groups, on a content-neutral basis, okay? So we can talk about what a content-neutral basis is in the question and answer session. Am I going to do this wrong again? Is this right? Okay. I did it wrong again. What is the matter with me? I'm getting tired, sorry. I know. Let's see. Distribution by school personnel. We just talked about that. Distribution by teachers to students would be endorsement and would violate the Establishment Clause. And I think, John, you were going to do teacher religious expression, right?
Yes. Thank you very much. Okay, last one, and then we'll have time for your questions. Again, as teachers, right, the key issue here is that when you are outside the school, when you are acting on your own, you obviously have full rights of speech and expression like everybody else. What you do in the classroom, however, your rights are much more circumscribed, and in particular, by and large, what you do and say in the presence of students, you will be seen as speaking for the state, and so if you were endorsing religion, the state is endorsing religion. So it is very important that public school teachers, while teaching about religion, that they not teach the truth of religion, that they not, point to the Bible as an authoritative source of knowledge, that they not basically sort of use their captive audience in the classroom as an opportunity to advocate for their own religious views. May teachers share their religious views with students. By and large, in the school context, this is a bad idea. Again, the Supreme Court operates with the theory, and particularly in the elementary school context, that students are young and impressionable, that you folks are very important role models, and the idea that you're saying, this is what I do and this is what my faith means to me is going to be very influential. And if the families of the kids, happen to agree with you, then maybe they won't care. But the public schools are for everybody, and you've got to make sure that you are not using your office to basically promote religion. And the courts have recognized that schools have a good deal of authority over teachers in terms of trying to lay down guidelines that teachers need to keep religion out of the classroom. So those are the basic points. And we are now happy to take whatever questions you may have.
Why don't we let people leave that want to leave? I know that
If you have a question, feel free, please, to come down. It's 3:45. I'm going to go ahead and excuse you. But if you have a question or something that's going on that you have